There are moments in life that divide everything into before and after moments that cannot be explained with human language, only felt deep within the soul. And that night was one of them, and it was not planned. There was no grand preparation, no perfect prayer, no beautiful words. In fact, everything within me felt broken, tired, and empty. The kind of emptiness that no one sees, the kind you carry behind a smile, behind routine, behind religion. And I remember the silence of that night. Not just the silence around me, but the silence within me. I had said many prayers before, but that night I had nothing left to say. And then sometimes that is exactly where everything begins. And because when your words run out, your heart finally speaks. And I didn't call out with eloquence. I didn't cry out with strength. It was barely a whisper. God, if you are real, I need you. And in that moment something happened. And not something loud. Not something dramatic, but something unmistakably real. And it was as though a gentle presence entered the room, not through the door, not through the window, but straight into my spirit. I could not see him with my eyes, but I knew. Oh, I knew. And there was a holiness, so pure it made me aware of every hidden corner of my heart. There was a love so deep it didn't condemn me, even when it revealed me, and I felt undone, and not destroyed, but undone. And tears began to fall, not forced, not emotional, but released, as though something inside me was finally letting go. Years of striving, pretending, carrying burdens I was never meant to carry, all of it began to melt in his presence. And I realized something in that sacred moment, and I had been searching for God. But all along, he had been searching for me. And the Holy Spirit didn't come because I was perfect. He didn't come because I had everything together. He came because I was willing, even if only for a moment, to be real. And that night, surrender stopped being a word and became an experience. And I didn't hand him a polished version of myself. I handed him the broken pieces, the confusion, the questions, the hidden struggles I had never shared with anyone. And do you know what he did? And he didn't reject me. And he wrapped me in a peace I had never known. And a peace that didn't make sense, a peace that didn't depend on circumstances, a peace that whispered, "You are mine." And time seemed to stand still. Minutes felt like hours, or maybe hours felt like moments. I couldn't tell. Because when heaven touches earth, time loses its meaning. And in that presence, something changed forever, and desires began to shift. And things that once held power over me began to lose their grip. Not because I tried harder, but because his presence was greater. And that is the secret so many miss, and transformation does not come from effort alone. It comes from encounter. And you can try to change yourself for years, but one moment in the presence of the Holy Spirit can do what striving never could. And that night, I didn't become perfect. But I became aware that I was no longer alone. And the Holy Spirit wasn't just a concept anymore. He became my comforter in weakness, my voice in confusion, my peace in chaos. And even now I can still feel the echo of that night. And not because it was emotional, but because it was eternal. And perhaps you are waiting for a moment like that. And you've tried to fix things. You've tried to understand everything. You've tried to carry what feels too heavy. But maybe, just maybe, it's not about trying anymore. And maybe it's about surrendering. And not with perfect words, but with an open heart. And because the Holy Spirit is not looking for perfection, and he is looking for permission. And in the moment you whisper, "Here I am," and he will meet you. And not with judgment, but with presence. And then when he finds you, and nothing will ever be the same again. There was a quiet emptiness that had been growing, not sudden, not loud, but steady and persistent. It wasn't the kind of emptiness that comes from loss alone, but the kind that lingers even when everything seems to be in place. Surrounded by routine, responsibilities, and familiar faces, yet something within felt untouched, unsatisfied, and deeply aware that something essential was missing. Smiles became easier to show than truth, and words became easier to speak than honesty. There was movement but no direction, activity but no fulfillment. Even in moments of stillness, there was a restless searching that refused to be silenced. And it was an emptiness that no achievement could fill, no distraction could cover, no effort could resolve. Attempts were made to quiet it, to reason through it, to ignore it, but it remained patient and unyielding. It pressed deeper in the quiet hours, when the noise faded and there was nothing left to hide behind. Questions began to surface, not just about life, but about purpose, identity, and truth. There was a growing awareness that something beyond human effort was needed, something real, something alive. And that emptiness became a mirror, revealing the difference between appearance and reality. It exposed the limits of self-reliance and the weight of carrying everything alone. There was a longing, unspoken yet undeniable, for something pure, something that could reach beyond the surface and touch the deepest part of the soul. It wasn't clarity that came first, but hunger. A hunger not for answers alone, but for presence. A realization began to form that this emptiness was not meaningless, but intentional. Drawing the heart towards something greater than itself, there comes a moment when words lose their strength, when carefully formed prayers feel empty, and familiar phrases no longer carry meaning. Lips may still move, but the heart feels distant, disconnected from what it is trying to express. It is in that space that the realization begins to settle, that true communication with God was never meant to depend on eloquence. The effort to say the right thing, to sound sincere, to follow a pattern, slowly fades under the weight of something deeper that cannot be shaped by language. And silence begins to take over, not as absence, but as exposure. Every hidden thought, every unspoken burden, every quiet fear rises to the surface. There is no place to hide behind rehearsed lines or repeated expressions. The heart stands uncovered, raw and honest, no longer trying to impress, no longer trying to perform. It is a vulnerable place where pride weakens and control begins to slip away. And in that stillness, something shifts. The need to explain everything disappears, and the desire to simply be known takes its place. The heart begins to speak in a language beyond words, through longing, through surrender, through a quiet reaching that cannot be articulated. It is not loud, yet it is powerful. Not structured, yet it is deeply real. And tears may come without warning, not as a sign of weakness, but as a release of what words could never carry. The soul begins to pour itself out, not in sentences, but in sincerity. It becomes clear that God was never waiting for perfect speech, but for truth. In that moment, communication is no longer about what is said, but about what is revealed. As the deepest parts of the heart begin to rise and respond in a way that words never could, it did not arrive with noise or sudden force, but with a quietness that was impossible to ignore. There was no warning, no visible sign, yet something shifted in the atmosphere. Something gentle yet undeniably powerful. The room remained the same, the surroundings unchanged, but within, there was a growing awareness that something holy had drawn near. Not distant, not unreachable, but present in a way that felt deeply personal. And it was not something seen with the eyes, but something recognized by the spirit. A nearness that brought both comfort and awe, as though every hidden part of the heart had suddenly been illuminated. There was no fear of harm, yet there was a reverence that settled in, a knowing that this presence was pure, untouched by anything human. It did not rush, it did not overwhelm, but it surrounded gently, patiently, as if waiting to be acknowledged, and every distraction seemed to fade, every competing thought lost its voice. The mind grew still, not forced into silence, but drawn into it. In that stillness, there was a softness, a peace that could not be explained or recreated. It wasn't dependent on circumstances or emotions, but rooted in something far deeper. The weight that had once been carried so tightly began to loosen, not through effort, but through presence. And there was a sense of being known completely, yet not rejected. Every flaw, every hidden struggle, every unspoken truth lay exposed, yet there was no condemnation, only a quiet acceptance that brought both humility and relief. The heart responded without instruction, drawn into a place of surrender, not out of pressure, but out of recognition that this presence was greater than anything it had ever encountered. Brokenness often feels like an end, like something has gone too far to be restored, too damaged to be made whole again. It carries a weight that presses down on the soul, whispering that what is shattered cannot be used, that what has failed cannot be redeemed. There is a tendency to hide it, to cover the cracks, to present strength where there is weakness, to maintain control, even when everything inside feels like it is falling apart. Effort is poured into appearing whole, while inwardly the pieces remain scattered and unresolved. And yet, in that place of brokenness, something unexpected begins to happen. The walls that once stood firm begin to weaken, and the barriers that kept everything hidden start to give way. Control loosens its grip, and the need to maintain an image slowly fades. What once felt like loss begins to reveal itself as an opening, a space where something new can enter. The resistance that once held everything together starts to dissolve, not through force, but through surrender. And it becomes clear that brokenness is not a barrier to transformation, but an entrance to it. The very places that seemed most fragile become the points where change begins. Where pride once stood, humility takes root. Where self-reliance once dominated, dependence begins to grow. There is a shift from holding everything together to allowing something greater to take over. And in that condition, the heart becomes more responsive, more aware, more open than it has ever been. The need to fix everything is replaced with a willingness to be shaped. What once felt like weakness begins to carry a quiet strength, as the broken pieces are no longer hidden, but offered, becoming the very ground where transformation quietly begins to unfold. For years, I had tried to earn favor, to achieve closeness through effort, through doing more, praying harder, and striving to meet a standard I could barely understand. There was a constant tension, a pressure to perform, to measure up, to be diligent in ways that left little room for rest or peace. Every success felt temporary, every failure magnified, and the heart grew weary under the weight of expectation. I believed that transformation depended on my ability to do, to fix, to improve, as if effort alone could bridge the distance between the human and the divine. But then there came a moment when striving simply fell away. Not because I had succeeded or mastered anything, but because something within me gave way. The relentless pursuit lost its power when faced with the presence of something far greater than my effort. It was as if the walls I had built with my striving began to crumble, revealing that the very thing I had been searching for was not earned through labor, but received through surrender. The need to control, to push, to perform, was replaced by an awareness that true change begins when the heart is willing to yield. And surrender is not weakness. It is a conscious choice to step aside, to release the illusion that we can carry everything alone. It is the recognition that transformation does not come from human effort alone, but from encountering something far greater than ourselves. It requires honesty, humility, and a willingness to let go of the familiar ways we have tried to hold on. In that space, striving gives way to rest. Obligation turns into opportunity, and the heart becomes open to guidance, correction, and renewal. The moment effort is replaced with surrender, the soul begins to move toward true freedom, not by force, but by presence and influence that cannot be achieved through human means. There are encounters in life that leave an indelible mark. Moments so powerful that they change the trajectory of everything that comes after. They do not always arrive in ways we expect, and often they come when we are at our lowest, when we are tired, broken, or unsure. It is in these moments that the ordinary is set aside, and the extraordinary makes itself known. The encounter does not rely on ceremony, preparation, or perfection. It relies on presence, openness, and willingness to receive. And when that encounter happens, something shifts deep within. Thoughts that once dominated the mind begin to quiet, and priorities that once seemed urgent lose their grip. There is a new clarity, not intellectual, but spiritual, a knowing that life can never be the same again. The heart that was weighed down with fear, doubt, and striving suddenly feels lighter, freer, more receptive to what has always been calling it. There is an awakening, a recognition that the invisible has broken through into the visible, that the divine has touched the human in a way that transforms from the inside out. And it is not a moment of instant perfection, nor does it erase struggle, but it changes perspective. What once seemed important now pales in comparison to what has been revealed. Habits, desires, and attachments begin to shift naturally as the encounter leaves its imprint. The soul begins to align with a higher reality, responding not out of obligation or effort, but out of a growing awareness of love, truth, and purpose that cannot be forced. Every decision, every thought, every action starts to carry the echo of that meeting, guiding, correcting, and inspiring without coercion. And one encounter has the power to awaken hope where it was lost, to restore faith where it was shaken, and to ignite a passion for life that human striving could never produce. The memory of it lingers, not as a fleeting emotion, but as a permanent mark on the soul, a reminder that life is never the same when the Holy Spirit truly finds you